There are some people in this world who seem to carry their own weather system, a personal climate of warmth that touches everyone they meet. Grace Emmy Rose Millane was one of those rare souls. Back home in the quiet, leafy town of Wickford in Essex, England, they didn't just call her Grace, they called her Sunshine. It wasn't a nickname given lightly. It was a description of her very essence, a testament to a 21-year-old woman who radiated a gentle, gregarious energy that pulled people in like gravity. She was the youngest child, the only daughter of David and Gillian Millane, protected by two older brothers, Michael and Declan. You can imagine the dynamic in that house. The baby of the family, cherished, artistic, a talented hockey player, a girl who had just graduated from the University of Lincoln with a degree in advertising and marketing. She had her whole life neatly unpacked in front of her, a beautiful, blank map waiting to be drawn upon. But Grace didn't want to settle down just yet. She had a hunger in her, a desire that runs deep in the blood of so many young people on that small island. The need to see the vastness of the world before the responsibilities of adulthood anchored her down. She spent the autumn of 2018 preparing for what New Zealanders call the OE, the Overseas Experience. It is a rite of passage, a pilgrimage to the other side of the world to find oneself. Before she left, in a gesture that speaks volumes about her heart, she cut off her long, flowing brown hair and donated it to the Little Princess Trust, a charity that makes wigs for children who have lost their own hair to cancer. She left pieces of her kindness behind even as she packed her bags. She hugged her parents goodbye in October, a farewell that was heavy with love but light on fear, because she was going to places that thousands of backpackers visit every year. She started in South America, tracing a path her own mother had walked decades before. Through her social media, her family watched her bloom. There she was in Peru, smiling with llamas, climbing the ancient steps of Machu Picchu, her face glowing with the sweat and triumph of a traveler who is exactly where she is meant to be. She was independent, she was capable, and she was happy. On November 20th, 2018, Grace landed in New Zealand. If South America was the wild, rugged adventure, New Zealand was supposed to be the safe haven. It is a country known for its rolling green hills, its hobbit holes, and a crime rate so low that police officers often don't carry guns on their hips. It is the place where parents breathe a sigh of relief when their children's flight lands. Grace spent her first week traveling north to the Bay of Islands, standing at Cape Rena, where the two oceans crash into each other, sending photos of the blue water and the white lighthouse back to the family WhatsApp group. "I'm having the best time," she told them. She was building a collection of memories that were supposed to last a lifetime. By the end of November, she had made her way down to Auckland, the city of sails. It was the beginning of summer in the southern hemisphere. The air was getting sticky and warm, the humidity rising off the Waitemata harbor. The city was dressing itself up for Christmas, with giant decorations and lights competing with the sunshine. Grace checked into the base backpackers hostel on Queen Street, right in the beating heart of the central business district. It's a place that smells of industrial cleaner and cheap cologne, filled with the chatter of German, French, and British accents, a transient home for souls passing through. She slept in a 4-bed dormitory, sharing space with strangers who would quickly become temporary best friends. It was Friday, November 30th. Grace was alive, vibrant, and buzzing with the energy of the city. She was just days away from her 22nd birthday, a milestone she planned to celebrate in this beautiful, far-off land. She had bought a black dress, something simple and elegant, perhaps imagining the parties she would attend or the dinners she would have. But beneath the surface of this backpacker dream, the modern world was ticking away on her smartphone. Like so many travelers looking for connection in a strange city, Grace was on Tinder. It is a digital roulette wheel, a way to find a dinner companion or a guide to the local bars. She was swiping through faces, looking for a smile that looked kind, a bio that sounded safe. She matched with a man. He wasn't a monster with horns. He was just a face on a screen, a 26-year-old who claimed to be the manager of an oil company. He seemed normal. He seemed interested. And in the innocent, sun-drenched logic of a 21-year-old enjoying the freedom of her gap year, that was enough. She didn't know that the city she was walking through, with its sky tower piercing the blue sky and its busy streets filled with holiday shoppers, was hiding a predator in plain sight. She didn't know that the safety of New Zealand was about to be shattered by a darkness that had been waiting for her to arrive. The sun was setting on November, and the shadows were getting longer, reaching out toward the 1st of December, the day everything would change forever. December 1st, 2018, dawned with the peculiar, humid brightness of an Auckland summer morning. For Grace, this wasn't just another Saturday. It was the eve of her 22nd birthday. There is a specific kind of electricity that runs through you when you are young and turning a year older in a foreign land. You feel invincible, like the protagonist of a movie written just for you. In the communal bathrooms of the base backpackers' hostel, amidst the smell of hairspray and damp towels, Grace prepared for the evening. She chose a black dress, simple and stylish, the kind of outfit that says you are effortless but elegant. She curled her hair, perhaps checking her reflection in the spotted mirror, wondering if this man, this Jesse, would look like his pictures. It is a ritual performed by millions of women every weekend, a hopeful grooming for a connection that might be love, might be lust, or might just be a good story to tell friends over breakfast. She texted him, the digital bubbles of conversation pinging back and forth, setting the coordinates for their collision. "I'm at the Christmas tree," she would eventually type. The meeting point was the plaza beneath the sky tower, the giant needle that pins Auckland to the volcanic earth. At the base of the tower stood a massive Christmas tree, decked out in baubles and lights that were just beginning to twinkle as the afternoon sun dipped lower. It was 5:45 p.m. The CCTV cameras, those silent, unblinking eyes of the city, captured her standing there. She looked small against the scale of the architecture, a solitary figure in black waiting in the crowd. And then he appeared, Jesse Shane Kempson. He was wearing a light blue shirt and jeans, striding with a confidence that seemed to border on arrogance. He didn't look like a drifter. He looked established. He had told her he was a businessman, a manager connected to the oil industry, a man of means. To a 21-year-old student living out of a backpack, he must have seemed like a sophisticated guide to the city's nightlife. When they met, there was no awkward hesitation. They embraced. A hug. It is a terrifying thing to watch in retrospect. The predator wrapping his arms around the prey, and the prey hugging back, completely unaware that she has just stepped into the trap. They pulled apart and smiled, the conversation starting immediately, the easy banter of two British people finding a slice of familiarity on the other side of the world. He was charming. That is the thing about monsters that we often forget. They don't wear masks of gore. They wear masks of charm. He was engaging, asking her questions, listening to her talk about her travels, about the green of Peru, and the blue of the New Zealand coast. They began to walk, moving away from the Christmas tree and into the rhythm of the evening. They weren't heading to a dark alley or a secluded park. They were heading to Andy's Burgers and Bar, a busy, well-lit establishment inside the Sky City complex. They sat at a table, surrounded by other diners, by families and couples. They ordered drinks, cocktails, beer, the social lubricants that loosen the tongue and lower the guard. Witnesses would later say they looked like any other couple on a first date. They were leaning in, laughing. Kempson was spinning his web, not with silk, but with lies. He talked about his success, his life in New Zealand, painting a picture of a stability that did not exist. He was actually living in a small hotel room, bouncing between jobs. A man whose life was a series of fabrications held together by his ability to manipulate. But Grace saw only the surface. She saw a handsome guy buying her drinks on her birthday eve. She texted her friend back in England, a message that now reads like a tombstone epitaph. I click with him so well. The tragedy of this moment is in its mundane nature. It was so normal. They left the burger bar and moved on, seeking a change of scenery, a new vibe. They walked out onto the streets of Auckland, the city lights now fully ablaze, reflecting in the puddles on the pavement. The wind was warm. They walked side by side, his shoulder brushing against hers. He was guiding her, suggesting places, taking the lead. They headed toward the Mexican Cafe, a popular spot known for its lively atmosphere and strong margaritas. As they walked, the CCTV cameras tracked them, jumping from feed to feed. In grainy black and white and washed-out color, we see them, a ghost story playing out in real time. He has his hands in his pockets. She is swinging her purse. They look comfortable. If you didn't know the ending, you would root for them. You would hope for a second date. But every step they took was a step closer to the room 308, and the man walking beside her was not thinking about romance. He was thinking about possession. The night was still young, but the darkness was already walking beside her, holding her hand, laughing at her jokes, and waiting for the moment to strike. The night had deepened into a neon-soaked blur as they pushed open the doors of the Mexican Cafe. It was a place that pulsed with the synthetic energy of a Saturday night. The clatter of plates, the thrum of bass-heavy music, the sticky sweetness of spilled tequila on the floor. They found a table, a small island in the sea of noise. By now, the alcohol was doing its work, dissolving the last thin membranes of strangerhood. They ordered jugs of margaritas and sangria, glasses clinking together in a toast to her tomorrow, to the 22nd year of her life that was waiting just a few hours away. Grace was radiant. The CCTV from inside the bar captures her animation. She is using her hands to talk, leaning in, her face alive with the story she is telling. She is the picture of a woman enjoying the thrill of the new. But if you look closely at the man sitting across from her, the picture shifts. He is listening, yes, but there is a watchful quality to his stillness. He is not just absorbing her words, he is measuring her. There is a moment in this bar that chills the blood of anyone who watches it later. It is a moment that screams of violation, a silent alarm that rang out in a room full of people who couldn't hear it. Grace stood up, perhaps to use the restroom, leaving her handbag on the chair. It was a small act of trust, the kind we perform every day without thinking. We assume the social contract holds. We assume our privacy is respected. But the moment she disappeared from view, the mask slipped. Jesse Shane Kempson reached over. He didn't hesitate. He pulled her handbag toward him and began to rifle through it. His hands moved with a practiced, invasive speed, digging through her wallet, checking her cards, invading the small, private sanctuary of her personal belongings. What was he looking for? Money? A weakness? Or was it simply an act of ownership, a way of asserting control over her before he had even laid a hand on her body? He wasn't a date anymore. He was a thief casing a house, assessing the value of the property he intended to acquire. When Grace returned, flushed and smiling, he was leaning back, the bag untouched in his mind, the perfect gentleman once again. She sat down, completely unaware that her privacy had just been violated, unaware that the man smiling back at her had just peeled back a layer of her autonomy. They finished their drinks and moved on, the city pulling them deeper into its rhythm. Their final stop was the Bluestone Room. It is a venue tucked away down a cobbled lane, a heritage building with exposed brick and timber beams, a place that feels like a cavern, secluded from the street. The atmosphere here was darker, more intimate. They found a table in a snug corner. The footage here shows a shift in the dynamic. The distance between them had collapsed. They were sitting close, thighs touching, heads bent together. They kissed. It was the passionate, sloppy, urgent kissing of a night fueled by alcohol and attraction. To the bartender pouring their drinks, to the other patrons glancing over, they were just a young couple heading toward a sleepless night. Grace looked happy. She looked like a girl who had found exactly what she was looking for on a Saturday night. A handsome guy, a bit of excitement, a story to tell. But there is a heaviness to this scene. You want to reach through the screen and shake her. You want to tell her about the bag. You want to tell her that his eyes are too cold, that his charm is too rehearsed. You want to scream at her to run, to go back to the hostel, to lock the door and sleep in her bunk bed. But history is a cruel narrator. It only lets us watch, never intervene. The alcohol was flowing freely now, blurring the edges of her judgment. She was unsteady, leaning on him for support, trusting his arm around her waist. He was the anchor in the spinning room, and he knew it. He was guiding the evening with a terrifying precision, moving her from place to place, isolating her from the crowd, drawing her closer to his lair. The clock was ticking toward 9:40 p.m. The Bluestone Room was the final staging ground. The laughter, the kissing, the touching, it was all a prelude. The city outside was cooling down, the traffic thinning out, but inside that bar, the trap was snapping shut. They finished the last drop of their drinks. He stood up, offering his hand. She took it. They walked out of the warm, brick-lined safety of the bar and back into the cool night air. They were no longer just two people on a date. They were a victim and a killer, walking in lockstep toward the point of no return. The warning signs had been there, in the rifled bag, in the aggressive confidence, in the speed of the intimacy, but they were invisible to a girl who saw only sunshine. 9:41 p.m. The timestamp is burned into the digital memory of the city, a glowing green set of numbers that marks the boundary between life and death. They emerged from the Bluestone Room into the night air, which was cooling now, the humidity settling into a damp chill on the pavement. Grace was clearly intoxicated, her movements fluid and uninhibited, the happy, stumbling gait of someone who has surrendered control to the moment. But Jesse Shane Kempson was steady. He was the fulcrum. He wrapped his arm around her, not just in affection, but with a guiding firmness, steering her through the streets of the central business district. They weren't wandering aimlessly anymore. They had a destination. The City Life Hotel on Queen Street. It wasn't a long walk. just a few hundred meters of concrete and streetlights. But it was the longest walk of Grace's life. It was the walk that took her out of the world. They arrived at the entrance of the City Life Hotel. It is a dual-purpose building, part hotel, part residential apartments, a place of transient lives and locked doors. They walked through the automatic glass doors, leaving the noise of the city behind. The lobby was quiet, the hush of thick carpets and artificial lighting. The CCTV cameras here captured them with crystal clarity. Grace is seen wearing her black dress, her boots, her bag slung over her shoulder, the bag he had rifled through just an hour before. She looks relaxed, perhaps a little tired, leaning into him. He is wearing his blue shirt, his face calm, his body language projecting ownership. They walked to the elevator banks. He pressed the button. The doors slid open, revealing the small, mirrored box that would carry them up. They stepped inside. The elevator ride is one of the most haunting pieces of footage in modern criminal history. It is silent. It is mundane. And yet, it screams. In the footage, Grace is still affectionate. She leans into him, perhaps whispering something, perhaps just resting her head. He looks at her, then looks at the floor, then looks at the numbers counting up. Level 1, Level 2, Level 3. There is a disconnect in his eyes, a hollowness that the camera catches but Grace misses. He isn't smiling with his eyes. He is calculating. The elevator dings. The doors slide open on the third floor. They step out into the corridor. It is a long, impersonal hallway, lined with identical doors, each one hiding a different life. They turn and walk toward room 308. Room 308. It was a small apartment, a studio, the kind of place designed for sleeping and little else. It was his domain, his cave. He took out his key card. The electronic lock beeped, a small, sharp sound that signaled access granted. He pushed the door open. The air inside would have been still, smelling of him, of his secrets. He ushered her in. Grace stepped across the threshold, walking into the dark. And then, the door clicked shut behind them. That sound, the heavy, mechanical latching of a hotel door, was the final punctuation mark on her freedom. Outside, the city continued to hum. Cars drove by, people laughed in bars, the Christmas lights twinkled on the trees. But inside room 308, the world had shrunk down to 4 walls and a bed. Once that door closed, the reality of the night shifted. The public mask of the charming date was no longer needed. There were no witnesses here, no cameras, no bartenders, just him and her. The atmosphere in the room would have changed instantly. We know from the trial what he claimed happened, a narrative of consensual rough sex gone wrong, a defense he would later use to try and wash the blood from his hands. But the truth of the room is far darker. It is the truth of power. Grace, tipsy and trusting, was now in the territory of a man who had spent his life lying, a man who had a history of violence against women that the jury would not hear about until much later. The playful atmosphere of the date evaporated, replaced by a suffocating intensity. The alcohol in her system made her vulnerable, slow to react, unable to read the sudden shift in the air pressure. She was a guest in a trap. The transition from the girl laughing in the Mexican cafe to the woman fighting for her life in a studio apartment happened in the silence of that room. The noise of the city couldn't reach her now. She was alone with the monster, and the monster was hungry. The timestamp was ticking toward midnight. Her birthday was approaching, but there would be no cake, no candles, no celebration. There would only be the hands of a stranger, the tightening of a grip, and the terrible, silent realization that the safety of the world was a lie. The silence that fell over room 308 was not the peaceful silence of sleep. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of extinction. Sometime in the darkest hours of the early morning, as December 1st bled into December 2nd, the struggle ended. Grace Millane, a vibrant, young woman who had climbed mountains and navigated continents, lay still. The life had been squeezed out of her, not by accident, but by a sustained and brutal force. She was gone. And in that room, the air grew cold, stripped of the warmth of her personality, leaving only the shell of a body and a man who was shockingly, terrifyingly alive. If this were a tragedy of errors, a terrible accident as he would later claim, the minutes following her death would be filled with panic. There would be frantic pacing, the shaking hands dialing 111, the desperate attempts at CPR, the screams for help. But Jesse Shane Kempson did none of those things. He did not check for a pulse with the hope of finding one. He did not weep. Instead, he reached for his phone. The glow of the screen illuminated his face in the dark room, casting long shadows against the walls. At 1:29 a.m., while Grace's body lay just feet away from him, he opened Google. His thumbs moved with a calm, predatory purpose. He wasn't searching for how to do CPR or ambulance. He typed, Waitakere Ranges. The Waitakere Ranges, a vast, dense temperate rainforest west of Auckland. It is a place of ancient kauri trees, rugged coastlines, and deep, dark bush. It is a place of beauty, but to Kempson, it was a disposal site. He was already thinking about the logistics of erasure. He was already calculating how to move a human being from a hotel room to the wilderness. He browsed maps, looking for isolated spots, zooming in on the winding roads of Scenic Drive. But his curiosity didn't stop there. He searched for hottest fire. He was weighing his options, burial versus incineration. He was treating the body of the woman he had just been intimate with as a problem of physics and chemistry, a pile of matter to be neutralized. The digital footprint he left behind is a window into a mind devoid of humanity. After researching how to dispose of her, he didn't sit in remorse. He engaged in an act that stunned the courtroom and the world. He accessed pornography. He watched hardcore videos, consuming them with a detachment that defies comprehension. The juxtaposition is nauseating. The lifeless body of a beautiful young woman on the floor, and the killer on the bed, satisfying his own urges, completely unbothered by the corpse in the room. It speaks to a compartmentalization so severe it borders on the demonic. He took photos, too. Intimate, degrading photos of Grace's body. He treated her death not as a tragedy, but as a trophy, a secret he wanted to capture and keep. As the night wore on, the clock ticked past midnight. It was now officially December 2nd, Grace's 22nd birthday. In England, her family was likely waking up, excited to send her messages, to sing happy birthday over a video call. They were preparing to celebrate the day she entered the world, unaware that on the other side of the planet, she had just left it. Her phone, likely still in her bag or on the table, would soon start to buzz with notifications, wishes of love, emojis of cakes and balloons, digital confetti piling up in a device that would never be unlocked by her again. Kempson eventually slept. He slept in the same room, perhaps in the same bed, breathing the same air as his victim. When he woke, the sun was rising over Auckland. The city was waking up to a Sunday morning. Church bells might have been ringing. Cafes were opening their doors. The smell of coffee was drifting through the streets. The world was normal. But inside room 308, the timeline had fractured. Kempson was now living in a reality of his own making, a reality where he had to become an actor on a stage. He had to clean. He had to shop. He had to hide. The digital darkness of the night was over, but the physical work of the cover-up was just beginning. He looked at Grace one last time, not as a person, but as cargo. And then, with the callous efficiency of a man running errands, he prepared to step out into the birthday sunshine. The sun rose on. December 2nd, 2018, washing the streets of Auckland in a brilliant, golden light. It was the height of summer, a day that beckoned people to the beaches, to the parks, to the cafes lining the harbor. For the Millane family in England, this date was circled in red on the calendar, Grace's 22nd birthday. At that very moment, across the time zones, messages were flooding into her phone. Happy birthday, sunshine. Have the best day. Miss you so much. The digital love piled up in the cloud, waiting for eyes that would never open to see it. While her friends imagined her waking up in a hostel dorm, or perhaps enjoying a birthday brunch with a view of the ocean, the reality was confined to the stale air of room 308. Grace was there, but she was no longer Grace. She was a secret that needed to be kept. And the man who held that secret, Jesse Shane Kempson, was about to step out into the birthday morning not to buy a cake, but to buy a coffin. He left the City Life Hotel around 8 a.m. The CCTV cameras picked him up again, and if you didn't know what he had done, you would see nothing remarkable. He was just a guy running Sunday errands. He wore a fresh set of clothes, his face scrubbed clean of the previous night's violence. He walked with a relaxed, easy gait, blending perfectly into the flow of the city. He headed straight for the warehouse, a large department store in the atrium on Elliott, known to locals as the Red Shed, a place where you go for bargains, for household goods, for the mundane necessities of life. He wasn't there for a toaster or a towel. He walked into the luggage section. He needed something specific, something large, something durable. He browsed the aisles, testing zippers, checking the depth of suitcases. He finally settled on a large, hard-shelled suitcase. It was big enough to hold a life. He took it to the counter, paid for it with the casual indifference of a tourist preparing for a trip, and walked out. But his shopping list wasn't finished. He needed to clean. He walked to the Countdown supermarket, the bright fluorescent lights humming overhead. He pushed a trolley down the aisles, surrounded by families buying groceries for the week: cereal, milk, bread. Kempson's cart told a different story. He picked up bottle after bottle of cleaning products: Genola bleach, heavy-duty surface cleaners, rubber gloves. He wasn't just tidying up. He was preparing to scrub away the forensic evidence of a murder. He moved through the store with a chilling efficiency, picking items off the shelf without hesitation. At one point, he even stopped to browse the gumboots, perhaps contemplating the mud of the burial site he had researched hours earlier. The sheer audacity of his calmness is what haunts the footage. He stood in the checkout line, waiting behind ordinary people, making small talk with the cashier, paying for the tools he would use to erase a human being. There was no sweat on his brow, no shaking in his hands. He was a chameleon, mimicking the behavior of a civilized man while carrying the intent of a butcher. He left the supermarket, his hands full of plastic bags, the large suitcase rolling behind him. To the passers-by on Queen Street, he looked like a guy who had just done a big shop, maybe moving into a new place or preparing for a holiday. No one looked twice. No one saw the darkness that clung to him. He walked back to the City Life Hotel, the wheels of the suitcase clattering against the pavement, a sound that, in hindsight, sounds like a funeral drum. He swiped his key card, the beep granting him entry once again to the lobby. He rode the elevator up, the silence of the lift shared only with his reflection in the mirrored walls. When the doors opened on the third floor, he walked back to room 308. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was as he had left it. The body of Grace Millane lay there, a silent accusation. He set the bags down. He unzipped the suitcase. The sound of the zipper opening would have been loud in the quiet room. This was the moment the physical reality of his crime truly began. He wasn't just a killer now. He was a disposer. He had to manipulate her limbs, the limbs that had danced and hugged just hours before, to force them into the confines of the luggage. He had to break the rigida mortis. He had to violate her dignity one final, terrible time. He poured the bleach, the chemical smell of chlorine filling the small apartment, masking the scent of death but burning the eyes. He scrubbed the carpet, the bathroom, the surfaces where they had touched. He was erasing her. He was scrubbing away the sunshine, trying to turn a vibrant life into a sterile, empty room. And all the while, her phone continued to buzz with birthday wishes, vibrating on the table, a heartbeat of love that could no longer reach her. He packed her away, zipped the case shut, and stood back. Grace Millane was gone. In her place was just a piece of luggage, ready to be wheeled out the door. The afternoon of December 2nd brought a shift in the atmosphere. The bright morning sun began to dip, casting longer shadows across the city, but for Jesse Shane Kempson, the day was far from over. He had packed the body. He had bought the bleach. But he still had a problem. The suitcase was too heavy to carry on foot to the wilderness, and the carpet in room 308 still held the invisible, chemical traces of death that he feared. He needed transport, and he needed a deeper clean. Most people, in the wake of such a horror, would be paralyzed by the magnitude of their actions. They would be hiding, trembling, waiting for the knock on the door. Kempson, however, was operating with a psychopathic ambition. He wasn't just covering up a crime. He was living his life as if the crime were merely a logistical inconvenience. He left the hotel again, leaving the suitcase standing like a sentinel in the silent room. He made his way to a rental car agency, specifically a Go Rentals branch. He needed a vehicle that wouldn't draw attention, something standard, something that could blend into the traffic of a Monday morning commute or a Sunday drive. He signed the paperwork for a red Toyota Corolla hatchback. The transaction was mundane. He showed his license, signed his name, perhaps made small talk about the weather. He was handed the keys to the vehicle that would become a hearse. He didn't load the suitcase immediately, though. He had other plans. He had another appointment. In a twist that defies all human empathy, Kempson had arranged another Tinder date for that very afternoon. While Grace's body lay folded inside a suitcase in his apartment, he drove the rental car to Ponsonby, an upscale, trendy suburb known for its villas, bars, and boutiques. He parked the car and walked into a bar called the Oxford. He was there to meet another woman, another potential victim, another face from an app. He sat down, ordered a drink, and waited. When she arrived, he smiled. It was the same smile he had given Grace less than 24 hours earlier. The conversation that followed is a study in deception. He didn't look like a man who had just strangled a woman. He didn't look like a man who had spent the morning scrubbing blood and bodily fluids from a carpet. He was chatty. He was engaging. But there were cracks in the facade, strange slips that only make sense in retrospect. He told this new woman a story about a mate who had gone to prison for manslaughter, a bizarre and unprompted topic that perhaps bubbled up from the subconscious guilt he was suppressing. He mentioned the police. He talked about how intense the day had been. To the woman sitting across from him, it just seemed like he was a bit odd, a bit intense, perhaps a storyteller. She had no idea that the intensity he spoke of was the physical act of murder. She had no idea that she was sitting across from a man who was currently in the middle of disposing of a body. They sat there for an hour or so, drinking in the Sunday afternoon sun, while the ghost of Grace Millane hovered unseen between them. He eventually ended the date. He didn't take her back to his place. He couldn't. His room was occupied by the dead. He said his goodbyes, playing the part of the busy man, and walked back to the red Toyota. But he didn't go straight home. He drove to a supermarket, not for food, but for machinery. He went to the service counter and hired a rug doctor, a heavy-duty industrial carpet cleaner. He bought the necessary detergents. He loaded the bulky red machine into the back of the rental car. He drove back to the City Life Hotel as the evening set in. He hauled the rug doctor up the elevator, past the lobby, past the eyes of the staff, and into room 308. The door closed. He was alone with Grace again. He plugged in the machine. The loud, mechanical roar of the vacuum filled the small room, drowning out the city noise. He pushed it back and forth over the spot where she had died, the soapy water sucking up the evidence, the machine humming a monotonous dirge. He was scrubbing the timeline clean, trying to wash away the DNA, the life, the very existence of Grace Millane from the fibers of the floor. He cleaned with a meticulous, obsessive energy, preparing the room for the next day, preparing the stage for his final act. He was exhausted, surely, but he couldn't stop. The suitcase was still there. The body was still there. And tomorrow, he had to take her for a drive. Monday, December 3rd, brought the sharp, busy energy of a working week to Auckland. The weekend was over. Commuters were flooding the motorways. Coffee machines were hissing in office break rooms, and the city was turning its gears again. Inside the City Life Hotel, Jesse Shane Kempson was also starting his work. He had a schedule to keep. He had a checkout time of sorts. He went down to the lobby, not to leave, but to fetch a luggage trolley, one of those brass-plated carts with red carpet designed to help tourists move their souvenirs and clothes. He wheeled it into the elevator, the wheels squeaking slightly on the polished floor, and rode it up to room 308. He loaded the suitcase onto the cart. It was heavy now, laden with the terrible weight of the secret inside. He placed a few other bags on top, a camouflage of normalcy. He pushed the trolley out into the hallway, locking the door on the empty room that still smelled faintly of bleach and damp carpet. He rode the elevator down to the basement car park, bypassing the lobby, bypassing the eyes of the concierge. He rolled the trolley to the red Toyota Corolla hatchback. He popped the trunk. With a heave that required visible physical effort, he lifted the suitcase. He lifted Grace and placed her into the back of the car. He slammed the trunk shut. The cargo was loaded. He pulled out of the parking garage and into the bright morning light. He didn't head for the airport. He headed west. But he had one more stop to make before he left the city limits. He drove to a hardware store, an IDM in Western Springs. He walked in among the builders and trod eyes in their high-vis vests, men buying timber and nails for houses. Kempson bought a shovel, a red-handled, spade-end shovel. He paid for it, carried it out to the car, and tossed it in the back with the suitcase. The toolkit was complete. He got back behind the wheel and turned the car toward the horizon, toward the Waitakere Ranges. The drive to the ranges is a journey of transformation. You leave the concrete grid of the city, the gray motorways and glass towers, and suddenly you are in a world of intense, prehistoric green. The Waitakere Ranges are a rainforest, a sprawling mass of native bush that clings to the hills overlooking the Tasman Sea. The road he chose, Scenic Drive, lives up to its name. It winds like a snake through the canopy, flanked by giant ferns and towering kauri trees that block out the sun. It is a place of breathtaking beauty, a place where people go to hike, to breathe, to find peace. Kempson was driving there to hide a war crime. He navigated the twists and turns, the red car a bright spot against the dark wall of the forest. He was looking for a specific spot, a pull-off near the reservoir, a place quiet enough to do what needed to be done. He found it, a gravel lay-by, shielded by the density of the bush. He pulled the car over and killed the engine. The silence of the forest rushed in, the call of the 2A birds, the rustle of the wind in the manuka trees, the distant hum of cicadas. He got out. He opened the trunk. He took the shovel and the suitcase. He dragged the heavy case off the road, pushing through the undergrowth, fighting the tangled vines and the soft, damp earth. He didn't go far, perhaps 10 or 20 meters, just enough to be swallowed by the green. He found a spot where the earth looked yielding. He dug. It wasn't a ceremony, it was a disposal. He placed the suitcase in the shallow grave, covering it with loose soil, with leaves, with branches. He tried to make it look like the forest floor, to stitch the wound in the earth closed. He left Grace there. He left the girl who loved sunsets and salsa dancing alone in the cold, damp dark of the Waitakere bush. She was surrounded by the nature she loved, but she was thousands of miles from the people who loved her. He walked back to the car, the sweat drying on his skin. He threw the shovel in the back. He started the engine and drove away, leaving the silence to settle back over the grave. But his work wasn't done. He drove back toward the city, the red Toyota now lighter but carrying the evidence of the forest, mud on the tires, dirt on the mats. He stopped at a car wash. He spent time cleaning the vehicle, vacuuming the interior, wiping down the dashboard. He was meticulous. He was scrubbing away the Waitakere Ranges just as he had scrubbed away the hotel room. He returned the rental car later that day, handing the keys back to the agent with a smile, a satisfied customer who had just taken a little trip. He walked away, blending back into the city, believing he had won. He thought he had buried the truth in the forest. He didn't know that the earth has a way of speaking, and that the city was already beginning to wake up to the absence of sunshine. While the red Toyota Corolla was being scrubbed clean and returned to the rental agency, a different kind of silence was spreading across the globe, growing louder with every passing hour. In Wickford, Essex, the candles on the birthday cake had burned down, but the birthday girl hadn't called. The messages on WhatsApp, "Happy birthday, Grace. Hope you're having a blast," remained gray, 2 ticks indicating delivery, but no blue ticks of readership. For a generation that lives online, where connection is constant and instantaneous, this digital silence is the modern equivalent of a scream. Grace was a communicator. She posted photos of her breakfast, her walks, her outfits. She messaged her mother daily. For her to go dark on her 22nd birthday was not just out of character. It was impossible. The worry in the Millane household curdled into panic. The calls to her phone went straight to voicemail, a recorded robotic voice replacing the cheerful greeting of their daughter. By December 5th, the dread had become unbearable. The family contacted the New Zealand police. A file was opened. A name was typed into the system: Grace Millane. Status: missing. The distance between England and New Zealand is immense: 11,000 miles of ocean and land. For David Millane, Grace's father, that distance became a torture chamber. He boarded a plane, leaving his wife and sons behind to man the phones, embarking on the longest flight of his life. He was flying into the unknown, chasing the ghost of his daughter across the time zones. He arrived in Auckland on Friday, December 7th. He stepped off the plane not as a tourist, but as a man on a desperate mission. He was met by Detective Inspector Scott Beard, a seasoned officer whose face would soon become familiar to the world. The police were already moving fast. They had released photos of Grace. They were canvassing the backpackers' hostels. They were pulling the digital threads of her life. That same day, David Millane faced the media. It is a scene that broke the heart of a nation. He sat at a table, flanked by police officers, the harsh camera flashes illuminating the lines of exhaustion and terror on his face. He tried to speak, to read a prepared statement, but the grief was a physical weight in his throat. Grace is a lovely, outgoing, fun-loving, family-oriented daughter, he managed to say, his voice cracking, tears streaming down his face. He described her as sunshine. He begged for information. It wasn't just a news clip. It was a father's raw, unvarnished love bleeding out on live television. The people of New Zealand, known for their hospitality, Manukatanga, felt a collective wave of shame and sorrow. This girl was a guest in their house, and she was missing. But while the public was looking for a missing tourist, the police investigation had already taken a dark turn behind the scenes. They weren't just looking for a girl who had wandered off. They were hunting a predator. The team had secured the CCTV footage from the City Life Hotel. They watched the tapes. They saw Grace enter the lobby at 9:41 p.m. on Saturday night. They saw her enter the elevator. They saw her get off on the third floor. And then they watched the hours tick by. They watched Sunday come and go. They watched Monday arrive. They watched hundreds of people enter and leave the building, but they never saw Grace Millane walk out. She had vanished into the architecture, but she hadn't been alone. The footage clearly showed the man in the blue shirt, the man who had hugged her, the man who had led her to the elevator. Police quickly identified him as the tenant of room 308, Jesse Shane Kempson. The timeline was now a noose, and it was tightening. They tracked his movements. They saw him by the suitcase. They saw him by the cleaning products. They tracked the rental car. The narrative was shifting rapidly from a missing persons case to a homicide inquiry. The hope that Grace had simply gone camping or lost her phone was evaporating with every new frame of video evidence. The detectives knew she was dead. They knew she had been carried out in that suitcase. The question was no longer, where is Grace? But where did he put her? They brought Kempson in for questioning. He sat in the interrogation room, the same arrogance that had allowed him to go on a date, while a body lay in his room, now facing the cold, hard questions of the law. He spun lies. He told them they went their separate ways. He tried to rewrite history, but the police had the eyes of the city on their side. They had the timestamps. They had the receipts. And they had a father waiting in a hotel room who needed to know where his sunshine had gone. The interrogation room is a theater of pressure, a small, windowless box where the truth is squeezed out of the silence. Jesse Shane Kempson sat there, initially calm, weaving a fabric of lies that he thought would hold. He told Detective Inspector Scott Beard and his team that he and Grace had parted ways at the hotel, that she had walked out into the night to meet someone else. It was a classic deflection, a story designed to play on the transience of backpacker life. But the detectives were armed with something sharper than intuition. They had the unblinking testimony of the CCTV. They showed him the footage. They showed him entering the hotel with her. They showed him leaving alone with a suitcase. They showed him buying the shovel. The weight of the evidence began to crush his narrative. The facade didn't just crack, it shattered. Confronted with the undeniable reality of his own actions, Kempson changed his story. He pivoted to a defense that would spark outrage across the world, the rough sex defense. He admitted she died in his room, but he claimed it was an accident, a consensual act of breath play gone wrong, a tragedy during intimacy. He tried to paint himself not as a murderer, but as a panicked lover who made terrible choices in the aftermath. But the police didn't stop at his confession. They needed Grace. Based on the location data from his phone and the rental car, the search teams descended on the Waitakere Ranges. On December 9th, a week after she had walked into that hotel room, they found her, deep in the bush, off Scenic Drive, in a shallow grave covered by a thin layer of soil and fern fronds. They found the suitcase. The forensic team worked with a somber reverence, unearthing the luggage that held the missing daughter. It was the moment all hope was extinguished, the moment the missing person file was officially closed and the murder investigation began in earnest. David Millane was given the news no father should ever hear. He visited the site, performing a traditional Maori blessing with local iwi, a spiritual cleansing of the place where his daughter had been discarded, trying to bring some sanctity back to the soil. The trial began in November 2019 at the Auckland High Court. It was a spectacle of pain. The prosecution laid out the timeline we have just walked through. The date, the strangulation, the porn, the photos, the suitcase, the dates with other women. They argued that you cannot accidentally strangle someone for the length of time it takes to kill them. It requires sustained, lethal pressure for minutes. They argued that his actions afterwards, the cleaning, the calmness, the burying, were not the actions of a panicked innocent, but the calculated steps of a killer. The defense held to their story of accidental death. But the jury, 12 ordinary citizens, looked at the evidence. They looked at the man who had treated a human body like garbage. It took them just 5 hours to return a verdict. Guilty. The word rang out in the packed courtroom. A single syllable that delivered justice but could never deliver peace. David and Gillian Millane wept, holding each other, their tears a mixture of relief and undying grief. In February 2020, Jesse Shane Kempson was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. The judge called his actions depraved and highlighted the total lack of empathy he had shown. He was locked away, his name becoming a byword for a specific kind of male violence, a warning about the dangers that lurk behind a charming smile. But this story should not end with him. He is just a footnote, a malfunctioning human being who destroyed something beautiful. The story belongs to Grace. It belongs to the girl who donated her hair to sick children, the girl who painted, the girl who climbed Machu Picchu, the girl who called her mom every day. In the wake of her death, Love Grace handbags were filled with toiletries and essentials for women escaping domestic violence, a charity initiative started by her family that has helped thousands. Her name became a rallying cry for women's safety, sparking vigils and changes in the law regarding the rough sex defense. The monster took her life, but he couldn't take her light. Grace Millane is not remembered as the girl in the suitcase. She is remembered as the sunshine that the world lost too soon, a reminder to love fiercely, travel bravely, and never let the darkness win.